So here's something I've noticed. More intellectual people, that is, people who do complex mental tasks for work and earn higher income, white collar professionals, academics, engineers, they tend to be less muscular. And I've rarely seen someone at the very high end of strength and muscularity working in one of those fields. Now, there are exceptions, of course, but that's the trend. And I wanted to investigate that and figure out, why that's the case. So I did some research and thinking, and I'm going to present my theories here. Now, the first point is time and energy investment. Time and energy are finite, and developing your intellectual capital for a career is time consuming. That takes time away from fitness. Now, the caveat is that urban professionals are actually more fit than the general population, and they exercise more, but the exercise is more specific to aerobic fitness. And as someone who's done a lot of cardio and weightlifting, I'll say that aerobic exercise, running, cycling, it tends to be more compatible with a mentally demanding job. And that's because you can do those activities without much mental focus on the task. It's easy to pop outside for a quick run in the morning or in the middle of the day. And for a fit person, it's relaxing and it reduces stress. I remember going on long runs and I would just meditate or think about my day. Cardio is also linked with less mental decline and may improve cognitive function. On the other hand, I found that when I'm mentally stressed or thinking about a lot of other things, it's very challenging to effectively lift weights, especially heavy weights. It requires that you empty your mind and enter into an almost animalistic state. So heavy weightlifting is just more costly energetically, and I think nerds and professionals need to save some of that energy for their mental tasks. Another reason that I think explains the preference for aerobic exercise over muscle building relates to economic class and social capital. There have been a handful of studies that show the higher one's social class, the more likely that person is to participate in sport, but the less likely they are to participate in what sociologists call prole sports. Now, these are sports more associated with the working class. Football, fighting sports like MMA or wrestling, boxing, weightlifting as well. These are sports that emphasize toughness, physical contact, they're violent. Now compare those to sports that are more common amongst the middle, upper, and upper classes, like tennis, golf, sailing. These are much less physical. Now there are exceptions. For example, in America, rugby is more of a niche upper class interest, but broadly, the more physical sports are associated with working in middle class America. And I'll cite the studies down in the description for those interested. Now, importantly, the class divide in sport is both economic and cultural. Historically, economics took priority. So wealthier people would engage in hobbies and activities that the lower classes couldn't afford to signal their wealth and sophistication. And certainly sports like tennis, golf, sailing, equestrian have a high barrier to entry. And if this class divide in activities is interesting to you broadly, I would recommend checking out the work of Thorstein Veblen. He was a sociologist in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And he wrote The Theory of the Leisure Class, which is not specifically about sports, but in that book, he gives a theory for how the upper class, and this was during the Gilded Age, how they would signal their wealth and sophistication through their hobbies, through these forms of conspicuous consumption that the lower classes couldn't afford. And I think there's some lessons from that book that are still relevant today. But today, even more so than economics, I think cultural signaling explains the class divide in sports preferences. So distance running, for example, is not all that expensive, but it's very much associated with a suburban, upper middle class lifestyle. And so the people who engage in it have more of an affinity with that group, and vice versa for those of lower socioeconomic status. And my theory is that for those who grew up doing pro sports, that experience imparted certain values and habits that make it more likely for that person to continue to engage in strength training and developing muscularity even after they've finished competing. And I'd also add that the physicality and the violence in these pro sports like fighting or football make it more likely that you'll get injured. And from my experience, more highly educated people tend to be more risk averse and less likely to engage in these sports for that reason as well. Relatedly, if you look at many forms of blue collar work, like manual labor, military, construction, police work, these sorts of jobs, they tend to be more physically demanding and have fitness standards. And that's because in those contexts, your body is the tool for your labor. Whereas for white collar work in more cognitive fields, you create value through mental problem solving. So your fitness isn't as relevant. And that dovetails into the next reason, which is that people develop identities around their hobbies. So in American culture, muscularity is associated with anti-intellectualism. And bodybuilding in particular is seen as especially vain and superficial because fundamentally it's all about how you look. Moreover, all of these strength sports can be seen as an expression of masculinity. And we live in a time where masculinity is coded as problematic in many contexts. And that's in stark contrast to aerobic forms of exercise, which are coded as more about health than vanity and more inclusive. And so I think those associations make muscle building less attractive to brainier, urbane professionals. And finally, if we're looking at the upper end of strength and muscularity, anabolic steroids are a big part of the culture. And as I've discussed in another video, steroids have adverse side effects, and we should generally expect that people who are more highly educated are going to be wary of the risks and will be less likely to identify with the hypermasculine culture around steroid use. And that's it. If you like this video, you might also like the 2 videos linked on screen about why I choose to stay natural and how running damaged my body. See you guys next time.